The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. Lecture 3. The Conception of God and the Meaning of Prayer. We have seen that the judgment based upon religious experience fully satisfies the intellectual test. The more important regions of experience examined with an eye on a synthetic view reveal as the ultimate ground of all experience a rationally directed creative will, which we have found reasons to describe as an ego. In order to emphasize the individuality of the ultimate ego, the Quran gives him the proper name of Allah and further defines him as follows. Say, Allah is one. All things depend on him. He begetteth not, and he is not begotten, and there is none like unto him. 112, 1-4. But it is hard to understand what exactly is an individual. As Bergson has taught us in his creative evolution, individuality is a matter of degrees and is not fully realized even in the case of the apparently closed-off unity of human being. In particular, it may be said of individuality, says Bergson, that while the tendency to individuate is everywhere present in the organized world, it is everywhere opposed by the tendency towards reproduction. For the individuality to be perfect, it would be necessary that no detached part of the organism could live separately. But then, reproduction would be impossible. For what is reproduction but the building up of a new organism with a detached fragment of the old? Individuality, therefore, harbors its own enemy at home. In the light of this passage, it is clear that the perfect individual, closed off as an ego, peerless and unique, cannot be conceived as harboring its own enemy at home. It must be conceived as superior to the antagonistic tendency of reproduction. This characteristic of the perfect ego is one of the most essential elements in the Quranic conception of God, and the Quran mentions it over and over again, not so much with a view to attack the current Christian conception as to accentuate its own view of the perfect individual. It may, however, be said that the history of religious thought discloses various ways to escape from an individualistic conception of the ultimate reality, which is conceived as some vague, vast, and pervasive cosmic element, such as light. This is the view that Farnell has taken in his Gifford lectures on the attributes of God. I agree that the history of religion reveals modes of thought that tend towards pantheism. But I venture to think that in so far as the Quranic identification of God with light is concerned, Farnell's view is incorrect. The full text of the verse, which he quotes a portion only, is as follows. God is the light of the heavens and of the earth. His light is like a niche in which is a lamp, the encased in a glass, the glass as it were a star. 24:35. No doubt the opening sentence of the verse gives the impression of an escape from an individualistic conception of God. But when we follow the metaphor of light in the rest of the verse, it gives just the opposite impression. The development of the metaphor is meant rather to exclude the suggestion of a formless cosmic element by centralizing the light in a flame, which is further individualized by its encasement in a glass likened unto a well-defined star. Personally, I think the description of God as light in the revealed literature of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam must now be interpreted differently. The teaching of modern physics is that the velocity of light cannot be exceeded and is the same for all observers, whatever their own system of movement. Thus, in the world of change, light is the nearest approach to the absolute. The metaphor of light as applied to God, therefore, must, in view of modern knowledge, be taken to suggest the absoluteness of God and not his omnipresence, which easily lends itself to a pantheistic interpretation. There is, however, one question which will be raised in this connection. Does not individuality imply finitude? If God is an ego and as such an individual, how can we conceive him as infinite? The answer to this question is that God cannot be conceived as infinite in the sense of spatial infinity. In matters of spiritual valuation, mere immensity counts for nothing. Moreover, as we have seen before, temporal and spatial infinites not absolute. Modern science regards nature not as something static, situated in an infinite void, but a structure of interrelated events out of whose mutual relations arise the concepts of space and time. And this is only another way of saying that space and time are interpretations which thought puts upon the creative activity of the ultimate ego. Space and time are possibilities of the ego, only partially realized in the shape of our mathematical space and time. Beyond him and apart from his creative activity, there is neither time nor space to close him off in reference to other egos. The ultimate ego is, therefore, neither infinite in the sense of spatial infinity nor finite in the sense of space-bound human ego, whose body closes him off in reference to other egos. The infinity of the ultimate ego consists in the infinite inner possibilities of his creative activity, of which the universe, as known to us, is only a partial expression. In one word, God's infinity is intensive, not extensive. It involves an infinite series, but is not that series. The other important elements in the Quranic conception of God from a purely intellectual point of view are creativeness, knowledge, omnipotence, and eternity. I shall deal with them serially. Finite minds regard nature as a confronting other, existing per se, which the mind knows but does not make. We are thus apt to regard the act of creation as a specific past event, and the universe appears to us as a manufactured article which has no organic relation to the life of its maker, and of which the maker is nothing more than a mere spectator. All the meaningless theological controversies about the idea of creation arise from this narrow vision of the finite mind. Thus, regarded the universe is a mere accident in the life of God and might not have been created. The real question which we are called upon to answer is this: does the universe confront God as his other, with space intervening between him and it? The answer is that, from the divine point of view, there is no creation in the sense of a specific event having a before and an after. The universe cannot be regarded as an independent reality standing in opposition to him. This view of the matter will reduce both God and the world to two separate entities confronting each other in the empty receptacle of an infinite space. We have seen before that space, time, and the matter are interpretations which thought puts on the free creative energy of God. They are not independent realities existing per se, but only intellectual modes of apprehending the life of God. The question of creation once arose among the disciples of the well-known saint Sad of Bis. One of the disciples very pointedly put the common sense view, saying, "There was a moment of time when God existed and nothing else existed beside him." The saint's reply was equally pointed. "It is just the same now," said he, "as it was then. The world of matter, therefore, is not a stuff co-eternal with God. operated upon by him from a distance, as it were. It is, in its real nature, one continuous act which thought breaks up into a plurality of mutually exclusive things. Professor Eddington has thrown further light on this important point, and I take the liberty to quote from his book, Space, Time, and Gravitation. We have a world of point events with their primary interval relations. Out of these, an unlimited number of more complicated relations and qualities can be built up mathematically, describing various features of the state of the world. These exist in nature in the same sense as an unlimited number of walks exist on an open moor. But the existence is, as it were, latent unless someone gives a significance to the walk by following it. And in the same way, the existence of any one of these qualities of the world only acquires significance above its fellows if a mind singles it out for recognition. Mind filters out matter from the meaningless jumble of qualities as the prism filters out the colors of the rainbow from the chaotic pulsations of white light. Mind exalts the permanent and ignores the transitory. And it appears from the mathematical study of relations that the only way in which mind can achieve her object is by picking out one particular quality as the permanent substance of the perceptual world, partitioning a perceptual time and space for it to be permanent in, and as a necessary consequence of this Hobson's choice, the law of gravitation and mechanics and geometry have to be obeyed. Is it too much to say that the mind's search for permanence has created the world of physics? The last sentence in this passage is one of the deepest things in Professor Eddington's book. The physicist has yet to discover by his own methods that the passing show of the apparently permanent world of physics which the mind has created in its search for permanence is rooted in something more permanent, conceivable only as a self which alone combines the opposite attributes of change and permanence, and can thus be regarded as both constant and variable. There is, however, one question which we must answer before we proceed further. In what manner does the creative activity of God proceed to the work of creation? The most orthodox and still popular school of Muslim theology, I mean the Asharite, hold that the creative method of divine energy is atomic, and they appear to have based their doctrine on the following verse of the Quran. And no one thing is here, but with us are its storehouses, and we send it not down but in fixed quantities. 15:21. The rise and growth of atomism in Islam. The first important indication of an intellectual revolt against the Aristotelian idea of a fixed universe, forms one of the most interesting chapters in the history of Muslim thought. The views of the school of Ara were first shaped by 933 AD, and those of the school of Baghdad by that most exact and daring theological thinker, Abu Bakr Bakilani, 1013 AD. Later, in the beginning of the 13th century, we find a thoroughly systematic description in a book called The Guide of the Perplexed by Moses Maimonides, a Jewish theologian who was educated in the Muslim universities of Spain. A French translation of this book was made by Monk in 1866, and recently Professor MacDonald of America has given an excellent account of its contents in the thesis from which Dr. Heimer has printed it in The Muslim World of January 1928. Professor MacDonald, however, has made no attempt to discover the psychological forces that determined the growth of atomistic kalam in Islam. He admits that there is nothing like the atomism of Islam in Greek thought, but unwilling as he is to give any credit for original thought to Muslim thinkers, and finding a surface resemblance between the Islamic theory and the views of a certain sect of Buddhism. He jumps to the conclusion that the origin of the theory is due to Buddhistic influences on the thought of Islam. Unfortunately, a full discussion of the sources of this purely speculative theory is not possible in this lecture. I propose only to give you some of its more salient features, indicating at the same time the lines on which the work of reconstruction in the light of modern physics ought, in my opinion, to proceed. According to the Asharite school of thinkers, then, the world is compounded of what they called her, infinitely small parts or atoms which cannot be further divided. Since the creative activity of God is ceaseless, the numbers of atoms cannot be finite. Fresh atoms are coming into being every moment, and the universe is therefore constantly growing. As the Quran says, God adds to his creation what he wills. The essence of the atom is independent of its existence. This means that the existence is a quality imposed on the atom by God. Before receiving this quality, the atom lies dormant, as it were, in the creative energy of God, and its existence means nothing more than divine energy become visible. The atom in its essence, therefore, has no magnitude. It has its position, which does not involve space. It is by their aggregation that atoms become extended and generate space. Ibn Azam, the critic of atomism, acutely remarks that the language of the Quran makes no difference in the act of creation and the thing created. What we call a thing, then, is in its essential nature an aggregation of atomic acts. Of the concept of atomic act, however, it is difficult to form a mental picture. Modern physics, too, conceives an action, the actual atom of a certain physical quantity. But as Professor Eddington has pointed out, the precise formulation of the theory of quanta of action has not been possible so far, though it is vaguely believed that the atomicity of action is the general law and that the appearance of electrons is in some way dependent on it. Again, we have seen that each atom occupies a position which does not involve space. That being so, what is the nature of motion which we cannot conceive except as the atom's passage through space? Since the Asharite regarded space as generated by the aggregation of atoms, they could not explain movement as a body's passage through all the points of space intervening between the point of its start and destination. Such an explanation must necessarily assume the existence of void as an independent reality. In order, therefore, to get over the difficulty of empty space, Im resorted to the notion of pra or jump and imagined the moving body not as passing through all the discrete positions in space but as jumping over the void between one position and another. Thus, according to him, a quick motion and a slow motion possesses the same speed, but the latter has more points of rest. I confess I do not quite understand this solution of difficulty. It may, however, be pointed out that modern atomism has found a similar difficulty and a similar solution has been suggested. In view of the experiments relating to Planck's theory of quanta, we cannot imagine the moving atom as continuously traversing its path in space. One of the most hopeful lines of explanation, says Dr. Whitehead in his Science and the Modern World, is to assume that an electron does not continuously traverse its path in space. The alternative notion as to its mode of existence is that it appears at a series of discrete positions in space, which it occupies for successive durations of time. It is as though an automobile moving at the average rate of 30 miles an hour along a road does not traverse the road continuously, but appeared successively at the successive milestones, remaining for 2 minutes at each milestone. Another feature of this theory of creation is the doctrine of accident, on the perpetual creation of which depends the continuity of the atom as an existent. If God ceases to create the accidents, the atom ceases to exist as an atom. The atom possesses inseparable positive or negative qualities. These exist in opposed couples, as life and death, motion and rest, and possess practically no duration. Two propositions follow from this. Number one, nothing has a stable nature. Number two, there is a single order of atom. That is, what we call the soul is either a finer kind of matter or only an accident. I am inclined to think that in view of the idea of continuous creation which the Asherite intended to establish, there is an element of truth in the first proposition. I have said before that, in my opinion, the spirit of the Quran is on the whole anti-classical. I regard the Asherite thought on this point as a genuine effort to develop on the basis of an ultimate will or energy, a theory of creation which, with all its shortcomings, is far more true to the spirit of the Quran than the Aristotelian idea of a fixed universe. The duty of the future theologians of Islam is to reconstruct this purely speculative theory and to bring it into closer contact with modern science, which appears to be moving in the same direction. The second proposition looks like pure materialism. It is my belief that the Asherite view that the nafs is an accident is opposed to the real trend of their own theory, which makes the continuous existence of the atom dependent on the continuous creation of accidents in it. It is obvious that motion is inconceivable without time, and since time comes from psychic life, the latter is more fundamental than motion. No psychic life, no time, no motion. Thus, it is really what the Asherites call the accident which is responsible for the continuity of the atom as such. The atom becomes, or rather looks, spatialized when it receives the quality of existence. Regarded as a phase of divine energy, it is essentially spiritual. The nafs is the pure act. The body is the act become visible and hence measurable. In fact, the Asherite vaguely anticipated the modern notion of point instant, but they failed rightly to see the nature of the mutual relation between the point and the instant. The instant is the more fundamental of the two, but the point is inseparable from the instant as being a necessary mode of its manifestation. The point is not a thing, it is only a sort of looking at the instant. Reme is far more true to the spirit of Islam than Ghazali when he says, reality is therefore essentially spirit. But of course, there are degrees of spirit. In the history of Muslim thought, the ideas of degrees of reality appears in the writings of Abuddin's Sohrawarda Maktal. In modern times, we find it worked out on a much larger scale in Hegel, and more recently in the late Lord Haldane's Reign of Relativity, which he published shortly before his death. I have conceived the ultimate reality as an ego, and I must add now that from the ultimate ego only egos proceed. The creative energy of the ultimate ego, in whom deed and thought are identical, functions as ego unities. The world in all its details, from the mechanical movement of what we call the atom of matter to The free movement of thought in the human ego is the self-revelation of the great I am. Every atom of divine energy, however low in the scale of existence, is an ego. But there are degrees in the expression of egohood. Throughout the entire gamut of being runs the gradually rising note of egohood until it reaches its perfection in man. That is why the Quran declares the ultimate ego to be nearer to man than his own neck vein. Like pearls do, we live and move and have our being in the perpetual flow of divine life. Thus, a criticism inspired by the biased traditions of Muslim thought tends to turn the Asharite scheme of atomism into a spiritual pluralism, the details of which will have to be worked out by the future theologians of Islam. It may, however, be asked whether atomicity has a real seat in the creative energy of God or presents itself to us as such only because of our finite mode of apprehension. From a purely scientific point of view, I cannot say what the final answer to this question will be. From the psychological point of view, one thing appears to me to be certain. Only that is, strictly speaking, real, which is directly conscious of its own reality. The degree of reality varies with the degree of the feeling of egohood. The nature of the ego is such that, in spite of its capacity to respond to other egos, it is self-centered and possesses a private circuit of individuality excluding all egos other than itself. In this alone consists its reality as an ego. Man, therefore, in whom egohood has reached its relative perfection, occupies a genuine place in the heart of divine creative energy, and thus possesses a much higher degree of reality than things around him. Of all the creations of God, he alone is capable of consciously participating in the creative life of his Maker, endowed with the power to imagine a better world and to mold what is into what ought to be. The ego in him aspires in the interests of an increasingly unique and comprehensive individuality to exploit all the various environments on which he may be called upon to operate during the course of an endless career. But I would ask you to wait for a fuller treatment of this point till my lecture on the immortality and freedom of the ego. In the meantime, I want to say a few words about the doctrine of atomic time, which I think is the weakest part of the Asharite theory of creation. It is necessary to do so for a reasonable view of the divine attribute of eternity. The problem of time has always drawn the attention of Muslim thinkers and mystics. This seems to be due partly to the fact that, according to the Quran, the alternation of the day and night is one of the greatest signs of God, and partly to the Prophet's identification of God with Dahar, time, in a well-known tradition referred to before. Indeed, some of the greatest Muslim Sufis believed in the mystic properties of the word Dahar. According to Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi, Dahar is one of the beautiful names of God. And Raza tells us in his commentary of the Quran that some of the Muslim saints had taught him to repeat the word Dahar. The Asharite theory of time is perhaps the first attempt in the history of Muslim thought to understand it philosophically. Time, according to the Asharite, is a succession of individual nows. From this view, it is obvious that between every two individual nows or moments of time, there is an unoccupied moment of time, that is to say, a void of time. The absurdity of this conclusion is due to the fact that they looked at the subject of their inquiry from a wholly objective point of view. They took no lesson from the history of Greek thought, which had adopted the same point of view and had reached no results. In our own time, Newton described time as something which in itself and from its own nature flows equally. The metaphor of stream implied in this description suggests serious objections to Newton's equally objective view of time. We cannot understand how a thing is affected on its immersion in the stream, and how it differs from things that do not participate in its flow. Nor can we form any idea of the beginning, the end, and the boundaries of time if we try to understand it on the analogy of a stream. Moreover, if flow, movement, or passage is the last word as the nature of time, there must be another time to time, the movement of the first time, and another which times the second time, and so on to infinity. Thus, the notion of time as something wholly objective is beset with difficulties. It must, however, be admitted that the practical Arab mind could not regard time as something unreal like the Greeks. Nor can it be denied that even though we possess no sense organ to perceive time, it is a kind of flow and has, as such, a genuine objective, that is to say, atomic aspect. In fact, the verdict of modern science is exactly the same as that of the Asharite. For recent discoveries in physics regarding the nature of time assume the discontinuity of matter.